Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes.
Sheryl Sandberg says that leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. Like Sheryl Sandberg or not, I know that she's become a bit more controversial with that idea of leaning in and women could solve all our problems if we just tried harder, which is not necessarily where a lot of us are. But I do like that quote, and we thought we'd kick off today or focus today on our 2024 picks for the top leadership skills great leaders need.
Yeah, and the reason we're doing that is because 2024 is turning out to be a really tough year.
Is it? I haven't noticed.
It is. You're probably now looking at working in workplaces of multi-generations. Mm-hmm. So you might be leading multi-generational teams.
Is Gen Alpha in there yet? Are they arriving in the workforce yet?
No, too young.
They're about 17, are they? Yeah, so
They're
they're going to start arriving soon.
Adeline, I was chatting with my 17-year-old daughter the other day, and she was chatting about how she couldn't believe she didn't get a job because she's so incredible. And I was like, you don't have anything of value yet.
We're going wildly off topic here, but we went to McDonald's yesterday, and we were like, Adeline should work at McDonald's. They are a slick operation.
So slick.
I think McDonald's, I know a bunch of people who had their first job there. You learn how to work in an incredibly organised operation.
Yeah.
You get incredible opportunities and skills. But the other thing I was thinking is, especially with a lot of us who now, live in a very different world than when we grew up, of like working on the other side of the place that you've been taken to so many times and not thought about, I think is a really interesting life skill.
It is so slick. You can go to McDonald's University. I had a stepsister who shot right up.
Yeah, set you up for life. Anyway, so Adeline, apply there. Also, loved her appreciation post for you yesterday on Instagram.
No, so sweet. That was nice to come home to. So, no, thankfully Gen Alpha is not quite there yet, but there is Gen Z to baby boomers. There are redundancies, restructures, slowing growth. So we all know we need to do more with less. That is the reality of 2024. And everything from hybrid work to really genuinely supporting diversity and inclusion, and finally upskilling and adapting to new tech and artificial intelligence. It's like, could you throw anything else in 2024?
I know, there's quite a lot happening.
Yeah. If we were to pick leadership skills that are going to get us through to the other end, in one piece, what would those be?
And not even just get us through, but sort of thrive. It's been about 10 years since we've had tough economic times, really tough. So I feel like there's something in this idea of rolling in the good times and rolling in the bad times and learning how to really adapt to them.
Well, and I also like this podcast episode because I know that there probably might not be a lot of movement in terms of promotions and progression this year because of doing more with less, but that doesn't mean you need to stop development. So this could be an opportunity to really lean into some of these skills.
Lean in, as Sheryl Sandberg says.
Oh, that closed the circle. On to number one. I'm going to kick it off with the leadership skill of resilience. I think this is going to get us through 2024 and possibly 2025.
Can you define what resilience is?
Resilience is strength and coping in the face of adversity and change. And so we are going to be faced with a lot of roller coaster up and downs this year, and with a lot of change. And resilience is the ability to successfully navigate that in one piece and lead through it. Oftentimes, when you have low resilience, signs might include snap frustration and anger. It might include lashing out. It might include, I'm just going to quit. I'm going to jump on this job site. I'm going to quit my job. I've had enough. You might find that you're complaining a lot to your friends or your partners. You might be in a negative spiral in your head about yourself, about your performance, about your work, about your workplace. And so those are all signs of wavering resilience.
And so it's almost that thing where you're sort of full to the brim. You can't really take much more. So little things start to have a much bigger impact on you, or big things have a bigger impact on you, and they really
it's
knock
actually
you.
it's actually little things, and frustrations can add up to a point where you're reaching kind of the max of this. Like, think of it as a mountain, and the closer you get to that peak, the less you can take on, and the more volcano actually, the more you're going to explode.
No, I like it. So it's basically just all the things stacking up. We think it can be one big life event, but it's lots of little things.
Yeah, and
up.
if you have these, and all of these little things stack up, you can cope with mini crises or change and hard things. But what they do is they do start to layer up, and the more that you take on, you tend to then get to a point where you can simply not take one more thing, and it could be the smallest thing,
the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah. And effectively, you are at the peak of that volcano, and one little thing, seemingly small. I was on a coaching call this morning where someone was thrown under the bus in a meeting, wasn't there, heard about it after the fact, that someone had not spoken very kindly of the work she'd done and blamed something on her, and she just went off. Possibly a signal that you've reached the max of your resilience, and little things are going to tip you over.
I remember once bawling in the street and having to call my dad because I couldn't find my car. And it was not the car. Like any other day, I would have been like, I've lost my car. But I thought I was going insane because I was so overwhelmed with all the other things that were happening in life that one thing just pushed me over the edge.
Exactly.
So I think that happens to all of us. And I think like resilience, like everything else, isn't fixed. It comes and goes over time, but what you can do is sort of train that muscle a bit so that you are building the ability to put that red line up higher.
That's right. And or bring yourself down further down the volcano so that you can actually take on some things. And it is a muscle to be flexed. And not only should you be noticing it in yourself, and you will know what it is to recover for yourself. It could be that you need to spend more time in outdoors. It might be that you have to put into place some boundaries, saying no, not taking on others' work, having a meeting with your boss in terms of workload management. So you know that for yourself, but you should be noticing in other people. If you ask someone to do something or to have someone join on a project with you, or you're faced with a tough conversation, watch those signals in others if they are nearing their max, because it's not about the thing.
It's never about the thing.
That's where you go, hey, what's going on with you?
That's where, I mean, we can probably share some tips here, but that's where the idea of a mental health day, of actually taking proper downtime, making sure you stick to really good habits that you know work for you. So if it's going up for a half-hour walk every day at lunchtime, if it's sitting in the sun, if it's reading a book, if it's turning off your phone at nighttime, whatever it is, it's those things to kind of take you further down the mountain and to clear your brain and make sure you're freeing up a little bit more space to take on what will inevitably happen, things going awry.
Yeah. And being a great leader by encouraging other people to do the same.
Yeah, and really looking after ourselves, which probably leads to my first one, which is adaptability, which I think is particularly relevant as well at this time because things changed really dramatically over the last 6 years or so. We had COVID where we locked down and our entire lives had to change. And now we've gone from, in New Zealand anyway, and I know around the world the interest rates are slightly different, 2% interest to 6% interest. So suddenly our cost of living has really increased if you've got a mortgage. We've got these mass redundancies happening around the place. So things are changing really, really quickly. There is a huge difference between people who can adapt to change and people who get left behind effectively. And an example of that, I'll use the media landscape. If you were a journalist 20 years ago, you would be in a newsroom writing for a newspaper, a physical newspaper. You would probably be paid poorly but relatively well, and you would have job security and you would be the one source of news and information for people. Now if you're a journalist, you are fighting social media, mis and disinformation. There is no more money in news other than advertising. It's going online, and media organizations are figuring out how to monetize those digital models. Your work looks completely different. And I use that as an example because some journalists adapt, and you've noticed that some journalists have started to go, I'm going to create my own newsletter, or I'm going to play with video, or I'm going to figure out different ways of doing my job. And others have really struggled and just really want to keep the job as it was 20 years ago. And why is the world changing around me? You have two choices, and one of them is to adapt and the other one is to get left behind. The technology doesn't change. It's not going to stop for you. And that sounds really brutal, but that is the reality.
I love that we started with resilience, because in order to kind of accept and embrace and be open to change, because change is hard, we love patterns as humans and we love getting into efficiency mode, and quite often change throws everything out the window and you have to start fresh. So I love that in order to really embrace and adapt to change, hence the term adaptability, is we need to have really great levels of resilience. So love that we started with that. I was reminded of a book that my university professor in my last year recommended as I was going out into the career world, and he recommended a book called Who Moved My Cheese?
Oh.
Yeah, have you heard of this?
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
I haven't read it, but everyone
It's a story. It's a story of four animals that are navigating a maze. The message is that change is inevitable, and it's our response to it that determines our fate. So I would recommend that book, and that ultimately is adaptability, is that change is inevitable. We have to adapt to it. We have to embrace it. And in fact, our careers can be accelerated if we embrace it and lead from the front.
With change comes opportunity. And I think the thing that I've been thinking about in the last couple of weeks is how you can practice adaptability in a smaller scale. So I'll use some examples from my life. I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. Kyla's family had a sick family member. A bunch of them came to stay in the middle of renovations. That is so far out of my comfort zone, because I am used to living alone, having complete control over my home space, and everything's in its place and everything's perfect. And then suddenly we have 5 people in the house and chaos with the renovations. And I went, this is an opportunity to practice adaptability and go with it, and sit down and have a stern conversation with myself about what is going to be bad if your house is a bit messy for a couple of days. You're actually going to find joy in getting to know her family, and joy in having these people coming and going and being able to lend a hand. And so for me, that was one way. The other way is doing renovations. Everything goes really hard and everything changes and everything gets mucked up and people don't do what you expect them to do. And you can get resentful. I can get resentful and annoyed and frustrated and grumpy. Or I can go, I know that this is going to happen. I know that this is how this process is going to go. So I need to practice adaptability and go, things are going to go wrong. I'm going to have to deal with them. And knowing that that's the case helped me take it a lot easier and just go, this is a normal part of the process, rather than getting really frustrated about it and then getting curious about how I might do it differently.
My number 2 leadership skill for 2024 is decision making. Decisiveness, first of all, and the ability to make decisions is really critical, because in high change environments, when decisions need to be made, leaders make them. And you can always tell the leader is the person that's making the call. And it can be at any level. Doesn't have to be in the top echelons of an organization, but someone making a call, be it right or wrong, but with all the available information, is a leader and will actually take a risk and then, develop actions in a team to implement. But I love this idea of measured decisions in times of crisis. And that, I think there's a couple of things we can rely on. Number 1 is the people around us. And so obviously seeking input and listening is a fantastic leadership skill as it pertains to decision making. Looking externally at the cues, the environment, like what's happening externally. The ability to make a decision and take a step forward is increasingly important. And I just want to do a call out for actually trusting your experience, because we often will second guess our experience as it relates to decisions, which impacts our decisiveness and our leadership, people's perception of our leadership skills. And I would just really encourage people, trust your experience.
I love that you said trust your experience rather than trust your gut, because I always find trust your gut comes across
the same thing.
It is, but I feel like the gut thing is people often overuse that as I'm just going to go with it, whereas your experience is actually a data point. I feel like there is something in there that really means that you are making an informed decision. I love this decision making because I remember a couple of occasions where they have really struck with me. One is a friend of mine who is rolling out a lot of cycle lanes in Wellington, and she said one thing they never tell you about leadership is it's effectively all about making unpopular decisions. And I thought it's actually true, because you're making really hard calls. Rolling out cycle lanes in a city that doesn't really have any, you're going to get super backlash on that. But if you know it's the right thing to do based on your experience, based on the data, you've got to make that call. And the second time was with Dad, who used to run our military here, and he was making calls about whether or not to go into Afghanistan and Iraq. And he said the number of times people retrospectively would say, you made the wrong call. And he's like, great. If I'd had all that information and all that data at the time, I may have made a different decision. you can't make that. You don't have that information at
Yeah.
the time. And that to me was a great leadership lesson, in that you are never going to have enough information and enough time to make the perfect decision, but you've got to use what you've got and make the right one at the time.
Yeah, and indecisive CEOs will fall this year. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. And you can see people who've made it into top leadership positions by not rocking the boat, and they become incredibly ineffective because they just haven't stretched that muscle ever.
There's something about leadership, the concept of having people follow you. And if you make a decision, that is clarity. It provides a path, and people will follow you along that decision. And ultimately, you'll learn if it's the right or the wrong thing. Making the decision's the right thing.
Absolutely. Okay, well then the next one is curiosity, which I actually think ties in with all of these. And curiosity is, in my opinion, one of the greatest things. It almost removes ego from decision making, from leadership, because quite often we all have egos, and defensiveness is a natural instinct. And when you are in those decision-making situations, or when you have to adapt, or when your resilience is low, in all of these situations, I think curiosity is the thing that flicks it from really hard into really interesting, I think is probably the term I'd use. And so a couple of ways you can play that out is surrounding yourself with people who have different strengths and different opinions than you. And that you notice that again in leaders who surround themselves by people who think the same, and you can see the outcomes of that, where they forget to check on a whole bunch of different things and roll out really, really stupid things. What was the most recent one I saw? It was women's rugby. But it was a women's rugby initiative, and they did a women's rugby players versus men's rugby players. And it was like, women lead with passion and they like to use their emotions, and men lead with intellect. And this was like 2 weeks ago, and obviously massive backlash. And I'm like, who made that decision? And were they curious, and did they surround themselves with people who felt differently, or did they just whip up a thing based on their knowledge, their limited knowledge? So that to me is a great example of where curiosity comes in. And also it's that thing, and you see it all the time, people getting hard feedback or criticism, and you can tell the difference between those who really take it to heart and feel like a personal attack, and those who go, oh, I'd like to know more. Tell me more about how I can change, or how this impacts you, because I'd love to be different. And to me, that just like takes the sting out of everything if you treat everything as curious.
Yeah, well, I think there's two things I can think of. Number one is if you're going through possible restructures, redundancies this year, your organization, being curious actually removes you from the equation. And again, looking at a macro level of the organization, you start to think, why is it, how did we get here? Why are they making decisions like this currently? And it allows you to connect the dots to ultimately, if you become in that position, why you have to make some of those hard calls. But I think it removes that concept of us versus them, and go, gosh, we are actually in a really tough place at the moment, this organization, and for its survival, for its growth, whatever, we might have made some mistakes in the past, but it gives a deeper understanding and empathy for some of the tough decisions to be made, should they be handled well. That's the first thing. I
was going to say the flip side of that is get curious about how you can change how it impacts you. And that's things like maybe thinking about what's next for you.
Yes,
all that sort of side. So just in terms of practicalities,
no, I like that.
You're like, I really feel empathetic for this organization. I still don't have a job.
Yeah. Well, you might, but it might be like, if you were in the top job, what would you do?
Yeah, I like that.
It gives you an understanding of like, well, what does your revenue look like? Or how are you driving towards growth or goals? Or what are the stakeholders and shareholders expect of your business right now? It actually takes you away from yourself, and you get curious.
Because there's also what's that quote? Everyone can be an armchair expert, but unless you're in the stadium fighting the battle. Yeah. And I feel like this is a great way to learn leadership skills, right? Yeah.
And the second thing that I thought of is, this will be a year of conflict, and curiosity is probably the greatest overcomer of conflict, when you can actually just stop and listen to the other person's perspective and get curious about where they're coming from, what they might be experiencing, how might it feel to be in their shoes, and to genuinely ask and start seeking.
I love that.
Yeah.
I actually talked to a power suitor who did exactly that, and they went from probably a year-long conflict to besties who now work really closely together because
Wow.
it was just a couple of misunderstandings
Yeah.
and a lot of assumptions about what each other thought. And by becoming an expert on the other side, she really diffused the situation and fixed it, which I love.
My number 3 leadership skill, and my last one, is communication. And uncertain times call for an increase in communication. And I can think of a few things, and I probably will go to change. We are, again, moving to organizations as they stand today will look very different in 12 months from size, from focus area, from strategy, and that will have impacts on the business. And the more that leaders can communicate the why, the next steps, what you can expect, and what else do you need to know, the better you will feel as part of that organization. And I can think of a couple examples. One is when we were in the merger and the acquisition M&A phase of Hatch and we were moving into another organization, huge amounts of questions around that and what will it be like working for this next organization and what can we expect, and everything from the smallest details in employment contracts to the culture of what that might look like and what's going to change. And we set up really robust communications. We grabbed FAQs from everyone, we made sure there was a living document, and we really sought people's concerns and sought to, as much as we could, explain those in a really frequent way. And then I was involved my first board role, I was involved also in another kind of merger and acquisition thing and possible restructure. And we said, our commitment, we don't know all the answers, but our commitment to you is that we're going to meet with you every 2 weeks and you're going to submit your questions the night before this meeting and we're going to have all hands and we're going to answer every single question that we know the answer to. But it just provides that touch point of like, more comms is better comms.
Oh, and absolutely. I feel like sometimes when you don't know the answers or where the answers are going to be tough, people shy away from talking about them, but it doesn't stop people thinking about them. It actually just makes it worse. And the companies I know who did really well through COVID got really clear with their team and said, this is a tough time. Our business is halved. I'm going to show you regularly what that means and we're going to work together. And it brought the team together rather than feeling us, them again. It really created this environment of we all need to be responsible and own this.
I think communication is built on vulnerability, on transparency, and granted there's going to be some things you can't communicate. That's fine, obviously.
There is a line always.
Yeah, there's a line. However, there is always, it's always best practice to go, I don't know the answer to that, but we're going to get through this together.
Yeah, and I would say vice versa as well. If you are in a position that you're being made redundant or life is a bit uncertain, ask the questions, communicate vulnerably but kindly, because quite often people making those decisions would really rather be doing anything else as well. And so using empathy and asking and having those conversations and clearing the air, because you don't want to leave badly if you can avoid it as well. So there's a little bit there. My final one, so this is the end of 2024 leadership skills must-haves, is prioritization. Lots of stuff on. We're all obsessed with our phones. No one seems to be able to stick to an 8-hour workday anymore. It is an attention economy. Everything's trying to get our attention. So you have to get really ruthless about prioritizing. And I think I must have learnt this over my career because always working for myself, always juggling a lot of projects, you have to be really, really ruthless with what you pay attention to. And my girlfriend Kyla said the other day, I was talking about something and I keep forgetting stuff. Like I forgot which car had been dropped off somewhere and something else. And she's like, are you okay? And I was like, oh, this is how I ruthlessly prioritize. If I don't need to know that in times of great, like lots on my brain, I literally just don't think about it. I do not spend an instant longer on something that is not my problem, which comes across as like dementia. She's like, you don't remember anything. And I'm like, none of this stuff is important to me right now. So it goes out of the brain so that I can focus on the stuff that I do need to think about. I use lists. I use whatever I need to use to get to what do I need to do right now and ignore the rest, because it's so easy to get distracted by anything, everything, all the time.
I'll link to that rock, pebbles, sand article in this, and a lot of power suitors love that article about what are the big rocks. That's what takes precedence in your calendar. Block that time out. Then you fill it with the pebbles, the stuff that just has to get done. You could be able to delegate it. Maybe you don't have to attend that meeting. And then the sand, which is all the little stuff.
We could link to as well the procrastination article. Do we do a procrastination article? Because they go hand in hand. That sometimes those big rocks can feel big and hard, so we procrastinate on them because it feels painful and scary, and there's all sorts of psychology around procrastination. But just really, it clears your brain when you're like, this is the big thing I need to work on, get it done.
Yeah, exactly.
Forget where your car is. Who cares? Cars feel like a real thing in my life. The cars are the first thing to go when my brain is busy. But the other simple trick I think that we do every week is we sit down on a Monday and we have a checklist of things and we pull in the things we need to do that week. We do it together. We can do it individually and just go, these are the 3 priorities for today, this week, and just get the top, because if you finish those, grab the next lot. But that means that you will focus on just your top.
Resilience, adaptability, decision making, curiosity, communication, and prioritization.
Do you know how people at the beginning of the year do the word for the year?
Yeah.
I'd love to know what people think their top leadership skill for the year is.
Yeah, let us know. Leave a comment as to what your top word is, and or if one of these resonate, or if it's one of the ones that you're looking to flex and work on this year. We'd love to hear from you, either at hello@powersuit.com or just in this podcast. You'll see a question. So check out our membership network at powersuit.com. We'd love to meet you online and support your development in 2024. And we will catch you next time.
Bye.